when that we have, the conversation would be quite rich. It is an honor for me to welcome you to this important session on regulatory reforms for economic growth and competitiveness, hosted by the Ernest Shonekan Center for Legislative Reforms and Economic Development. The ESC for Legislative Reforms and Economic Development drives economic development through legislative, regulatory, and judiciary reforms, fostering stronger collaboration between the public and private sectors. Our mission is to serve as a knowledge platform, aggregating and deploying research and advocacy for developing a rule-based enabling business environment. Today's event reflects our commitment to engaging key stakeholders in dialogue, providing platforms for actionable solutions, and addressing the urgent need for effective regulation to unlock Nigeria's economic potential. Regulation is one of the most powerful tools that government use to shape economic outcomes. It serves as a framework for ensuring order, promoting innovation, protecting the rights of all stakeholders, and building confidence in the markets. However, the regulatory landscape in Nigeria is at times complex and challenging. While we are seeing significant efforts through initiatives like the Business Facilitation Act of 2022 and the reforms under the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2020, businesses continue to face regulatory hurdles that impede their growth and productivity. Recent exits of major multinational companies, the challenges faced by MSMEs, and the decline in productivity across several sectors all underscore the critical role of regulation in shaping our economic landscape. As we gather today, it is imperative that we assess how regulations have shaped Nigeria's economy and explore how we can collaboratively design better regulatory frameworks that support business growth, innovation, and competitiveness, both at the national and global levels. The theme of today's session calls for an examination of Nigeria's regulatory environment with a focus on improving predictability, transparency, and accountability. We will explore how regulators, businesses, and civil society can work together to ensure that the rules governing our economy are clear, effective, and conducive to economic development. This is especially important as we navigate the ever-changing landscape of global markets, evolving technologies, and the growing need for sustainability. The Ernest Shonekan Center for Legislative Reform and Economic Development is deeply committed to fostering dialogue between regulators and businesses. We believe that a well-regulated environment is a powerful engine for growth, but it requires the participation of all stakeholders. Our goal today is to identify the challenges businesses face in the regulatory environment, propose actionable solutions, and ultimately foster a more collaborative approach to regulations that benefits everyone, level playing field, so to speak. We are privileged to have with us a rich blend of panelists who bring a wealth of experience and insight into today's discussions. Their perspectives will guide us in exploring the practical realities of regulations, understanding the gaps that exist, and identifying the opportunities for reform. We are also eager to hear from all of you, as your contributions are vital to ensuring that the outcomes of today's discussions are both meaningful and impactful. As we embark on this session, let us focus on building a regulatory framework that fosters innovation, encourages investment, and creates a level playing field for businesses, both large and small. This is not just a task for regulators, but for all of us, including government, private sector, civil society, and development partners. Once again, I welcome you to what promises to be a rich and productive session. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to the insightful contributions that will emerge in today's conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. That was really good. I would like to, at this point, call on Mrs. Ozofo Ogimidia, the chairperson of the NBA SBL, to make a presentation on Nigeria's regulatory environment and its impact on economic growth and development. You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending this session. Please, could the slides go up? Sorry, just a few minutes. I was going to say, I have only 10 minutes. And, okay, 15, thank you. So as I was preparing the slides, the NESG team kept encouraging me to add more content. So I was going to say that we're going to share the responsibility today. I can't speak through every point on the slides, so there are going to be slides I will have up and leave it to you to quickly read through, and I'll just pick on the salient points. Thank you. I'm also going to set a timer for myself. When you see it go off, don't panic, it's just me trying to tell myself to get off the stage. Since we don't know how long this thing is going to take, I think I'll start talking. Maybe just the background. Okay. Maybe some of the background. So the topic for this presentation is Nigeria's regulatory environment and its impact on economic growth and development. My first slide was going to give you some statistics about the trajectory of the Nigerian economy since 2000, at which point our economy was growing at 7% annually and then took a steady decline to, I think 2023, by then we're at 2.4%. There were highs and lows, there were some wins, but the general overall picture was a steady decline. And one point I was going to make on that slide was the impact of of policies and regulations on economic growth. That was what I was hoping to show with that slide. And then moving on to, okay, let me see if I can put the slides on my phone. No, it's okay. Okay, thank you. Okay. Yeah. Okay, and then what does it mean for a nation to be competitive? The World Economic Forum defines competitiveness as the set of institutions, policies, and factors that determine the level of productivity of a country, while the Institute for Management Development defines it as the ability of a nation to create and maintain an environment that sustains more value creation for its enterprise and more prosperity for its people. Although these definitions are quite different in my view, what was clear from both is that regulations and policies are important in building an environment in which value can be created and productivity will soar. And so if we're looking at building or rebuilding our economy in a sustainable manner to enhance our competitiveness, we need to think about how we approach regulations and how we structure our regulatory framework. Now, in creating regulation, one of the important things to think about is the mindset of the creators of the regulation. There are different mindsets which reflect the objective of the regulation. For instance, there's a restrictive mindset that wants to limit and control specific behaviors, and that's not bad because there are negative behaviors that need to be curtailed. But where you tend to find restrictive regulation is, for instance, in safeguarding consumers, so consumer protection, labor and employment laws to protect workers, environmental regulation to protect the environment. So a lot of these regulations focus on restricting negative behavior in order to protect a certain asset or class. And then there's responsive regulation. So there's an issue that's come up and a regulation is made to respond to the issues or to a crisis. For instance, COVID. There were regulations that came up then to safeguard health, to restrict movement, to respond to the crisis. And then there is a proactive mindset to regulations, where you anticipate future challenges and trends, and then you position the economy to be ready for when that trend hits you. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so yes, let's just go to the yeah. Do I control my slide? If not, move on to the next slide. Just move on. So yeah, this was the one with the statistics. Maybe what we'll do is share these slides afterwards, since time is gone, and these were the definitions of competitiveness. The next one. I've gone through these restrictive regulatory mindsets, responsive mindsets, so I'm on the next slide. So there's productivity, where the mindset, where it's to, proactivity. Proactive mindset, I've talked about that. Then transparency, to create a regulatory environment that's characterized by openness, clarity, and accountability. Okay. So the next slide, please. So the objectives, the principles of good regulation. 1 second. So regulation must be transparent. It should be clear as to what it seeks to achieve. It should be easily understandable, and its objectives should be clearly stated. It shouldn't be ambiguous and hazy, and you shouldn't always have to go back for clarification or guess as you are structuring your economic activities. There's also accountability. The regulations must include a criteria for evaluating their effectiveness and holding persons accountable. There's proportionality as well. Like you recall, I said it seeks to control behavior. So does it over-control, over-regulate and stifle economic activity? Does it over-penalize for breaches? And then consistency. There should be a coherence in regulation, not just the regulation in a certain sector or the regulations issued by a certain regulator, but across the economy, so that your activities, you can kind of plan, and you're not in compliance with this one, and that puts you completely on the wrong side of another regulation. And then it should be targeted. It should specifically address certain specified problems. It should be an approach based, and it should minimize unintended consequences. Moving to the next slide. So this slide shows the regulatory environment. So there's a process of adoption in creating regulation. Adoption is where the regulation is conceptualized, it is researched, it is drafted, and ready to be deployed to the public. And then there's monitoring and oversight, where there has to be a certain body who is tasked with monitoring the behavior occasioned by the regulation, identifying risks, assessing compliance, and areas for improvement. And then there's compliance. The regulators, as well as the regulated bodies, persons, should comply with regulation. So if a regulator has set a time frame, they need to comply with it. Of course, we know that we have to comply with whatever is specified in the regulation for us as well. And then there should be enforcement, because without enforcement, the regulations are just lovely words on a page. They do nothing. And I mean, I'm sure we've seen various forms of or levels of enforcement in the country. If there's a red light, why should the cars stop and the bikes go through? Or why should the private vehicles stop and the commercial ones beat the light and there's no consequence? So, and then there's data innovation and adaptation. There should be monitoring. There has to be data that monitors the effect of the regulation. Do we need amendments? Do we need to modify the regulations in any way to better suit the market? This graphic, which it's not clear on my end, I don't know if you can see it, but because we numbered this 1 to 5, so we'll try to identify which of the players are responsible or intersect with these. So you can see the consumers are 2 and 5, compliance, and they also help with giving feedback on, so these consumers, yes, feedback that feeds into the innovation and adaptation. In the center is the government and regulatory authorities. they're involved in everything. We didn't put number 3, but I think that's even an indictment on us because they do need to comply as well. But I think in the center where you have government and regulatory authorities, they intersect at every level. There's private sector up there, where adoption, which means when regulations are being made, you do need feedback from the body you're regulating. You need to understand the pain points. You need to get their point of view. It's not a dictatorial government. So it has to be a collaborative approach. There's academia and research institutions there. There's also development and technical partners and civic society advocacy groups and the media. So the next slide. The regulatory cycle involves the regulatory instruments that establish regulation, define the regulatory environment, and then determine the regulatory processes. The regulatory instruments establish the regulatory institutions that execute the regulatory processes and assess impact. Next slide. So the regulatory challenges. So we've done this in a pictorial, but I'll just try and talk through multiplicity. I remember the last time a client asked me to help create a chart so they know everything they need to comply with. I think the chart was probably like 45 pages, and it was because it was a chart. If it was prose, it could have been 100. But just imagine that. You need not just a compliance officer, you probably need a compliance team when you think of the amount of regulation you need to comply with at not just the big ones we know, the federal level, but right down to the local government. There are all sorts of rates and taxes and compliances and licenses. So there's all that can create a problem. There are bureaucratic delays. Again, okay, for those who came in after I was introduced, I'm a lawyer. So when clients ask us, this is the deal, and we say, oh, you need X, Y, Z, and they say, how long will it take? And you're saying 4 months to get this one approval before you can implement. It's, to us in Nigeria, it's normal, but to a lot of people, it is very strange that a regulatory approval takes 4 months. So there's that. How do we make it faster and more efficient? There's also the, yes, like I talked about lack of transparency when it's not always clear what you need to do. When you think you've complied, you've supplied everything, and you are being asked for more things that are not on the list. So there's that. Then there's outdated, anachronistic processes. So it's this, and this is not just in whether the regulator systems are computerized. It's not just that. It's the mindset as well. It's the mindset of you are not here to punish the participants in the market. We are partners in this thing. It is also, even though it has usually taken us 1 month to pass this file up to Oga to sign it, now we can actually upload it on a system and it can be signed in 24 hours. So it's that mindset change. Then, of course, data, evidence and data, how we monitor and track progress and how we can really see the impact on the ground, the frequency of changes. There is one set of regulations I deal with. I call it a maze. It is a maze. When I mean, there was a time when every time I had to go to those regulations, I just couldn't figure it where to start. And you would read it, in those days, it was a hard copy, maybe 300 pages. So, and you will read it and find what you're looking for, but you could easily miss. And there was this constant fear of, have I missed something? Have I given the full picture? So now in 2024, it is electronic, so you can search, but there are like 20 amendments. So you search the main rules, then you go through all the amendments till you're sure that you've covered everything. So there's that. I think I've touched most of them. Let me move on because of time. Next slide. Okay, so we have 4 case studies. There are two where we think, on the balance, they're basically very good stories. The first one is telecoms. For all the challenges we have, you make a call, it drops. You call somebody, they can't hear you. Still, where we are today is a far cry from where we were before 1999, and the difference was changing the regulatory environment. That was all the government did. They didn't need to spend money. They just opened it up and let the private sector run. And we are here now where we have people that they may not have that much education, they may have nothing, but they have a phone and they can create content and they can generate money and they can bank in the village, even if the banks are closed. So that's what we've created with the telecoms sector. So just to highlight some of the impacts. So there's increased competition. I'm sure, I don't know who can remember when they bought their first MTN SIM and how much it was. I think I bought mine for 10,000. So, and I was late. So, but see what competition has done when the cost of the tariff on calls was so high. Now, if you have data, you don't even need to pay for your calls. You just call on WhatsApp or something. So competition has opened the market. It has lowered prices. It has improved the quality of service, even though that's still work in progress. And it has expanded the range of products available to the market. My timer is on. It has created an opportunity for, that's my timer. It has created an opportunity for investment, job creation, innovation. The next one, which is very dear to us at the Ernest Shonekan Center, is, the next one, please, is the Companies and Allied Matters Act, because we worked on it. And we saw it come to fruition. And we saw it liberate our market, the way we regulate Nigerian companies. We made it possible for there to be single-member companies. We made electronic meetings possible. It created the platform for the CAC to take its operations online, a lot of that. More corporate structures, more company rescue structures. And what's the impact? It has eased it has enhanced the ease of doing business in Nigeria. It has made it easier for SMEs to finance, to regulate, to comply. The other two case studies, which I will just gloss over. Next slide, please. The Naira redesign, I'm not going to dwell on it. There are positives that came out of this. Increased use of electronic. The fact that you can park by the roadside and buy carrots and cabbage from your malam and pay by transfer is a huge thing. It wasn't like that before. You had to carry cash. You literally don't have to do that again. But of course, there was a lot of pain, and inflation and exploitation by the people that were selling cash, the POS people. So there was all that. So I think from this, we take away the fact that the objective might be good, but implementation, maybe staggering implementation, and assessing impact and reacting in a timely manner. That's what we take out of this case study. The next case study, next slide, please. Electricity tariff hike is what we are currently dealing with. The electricity sector privatization has not delivered electricity to us. So how do we deliver it? How do we make the sector such that it encourages private sector investments? It can be priced in a way that the investors in the market continue to invest and develop the market, and in a way that we can actually afford to pay for electricity. So I think that this one is an ongoing challenge. There's a lot to resolve here. I think, hopefully, the next slide, please. So this is the last slide, and I leave questions for the room. What key regulatory factors contributed to our impressive growth? The word impressive, again, is questionable. But growth between 2000 and 2014, and how can we replicate that success today? And given our challenges, such as inflation and poverty, how can we leverage our regulatory frameworks to design and promote economic growth and social equity? And what steps can be taken to strengthen our institutions and ensure that they have the capacity and expertise to effectively implement and enforce regulations. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for a very wonderful presentation. So that we don't keep everyone waiting, we'll just go straight up to a panel discussion. So I'd like to invite Mr. Isaiah Bozimo, SAN, the partner of Roderick and Bozimo and former Attorney General of Delta State. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much and good morning. Let me just quickly invite the rest of the panelists. Can I start by inviting the Special Advisor to Mr. President on Industry, Trade and Investment, Mr. John Uwajumogu. Anywhere you like. And next I would like to invite the representative of the Director General of SMEDEM, Mr. Onesi, I believe. At least I got the first name correct. So I did one better than Nsikan. And next, somebody who I'm very much looking to hear in her views is the CEO of Happy Coffee, Princess Adeyinka Tekena. And last but certainly not least, to give us a very global perspective, is the program lead of the World Bank, Ms. Bertine Camphius. Well, so I welcome you all to this conversation. It's great to see we have quite a lot of people in the room now. When I saw the 8 o'clock start, I wished that Princess would supply each of us with endless supply of coffee. But it's good to see everybody here, and I'd like to just sort of hedge on the words from Mr. Chair, who said that the conversations we're having this morning are of critical importance. Important because we know the situation we're facing in Nigeria right now. Very, very tough times. Cost of living crisis, increase in the price of fuel, increase in the price of everything. And to me, regulation now more than ever is significant because of the real world effects it has on us and it has on businesses that are operating within the sector. And one of the striking things I saw from the briefing note of this session, and Mr. Chair touched on that, is the fact that several large players, multinationals, are exiting on account of the regulatory environment. But it's not limited to those big players. The MSMEs as well, the small businesses. I run a small business. So I know the difficulties I face in terms of power, in terms of keeping my staff, competitiveness. So, and I'm sure we have similar stories in the room as well. So I'm very interested in hearing what our panelists have to say. And I'd like to start, if I may, with John. John, I think given your role, you will have very, very unique perspectives as to what the rationales are behind some government policies. Ozofu mentioned one thing that resonated with me, the complexity, the sheer complexity of the regulations. And you refer to it as a maze. So let me ask this. Now, what is government prioritizing in terms of simplifying business processes for domestic and international investors that want to establish and, more importantly, scale and expand in Nigeria?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thank you to the NESG for this opportunity. I particularly like the theme for this year, which is collaborative action for growth and competitiveness, because I think it underlies what it's really required, that partnership that's required between the government, civil society, companies and individuals for us to ignite any enduring and transformative change. There's a quote that says, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. So for us, we obviously want to go far, And with that, partnerships between all stakeholders is going to be needed. More importantly, in the regulatory space. And to come to your question, I think what the overarching objective of the government, really, and given where we are as a transition economy, is investment mobilization. How do we create a conducive environment for investment to flow into our economy? We need estimates put that we need about $15 billion in the first instance to even come on par. And that capital is not deployed in a vacuum. There's another quote that says, capital is a coward and would only deploy in environments where it's protected. And what makes capital protected? You have to have a regulatory environment that is attractive to them. And for us, that regulatory environment has to have essentially 3 R's. One, it needs to be routine, so which means it needs to provide certainty, it needs to be predictable, and it needs to be transparent. And the actions the government have taken is reflective of that. I mean, off the bat, the president addressed one of the issues that caused anxiety among investors, which is unification of the exchange rate. And that was an effort to provide some macro stability, because one of the biggest challenges investors were facing, were an issue of capital repatriation, not knowing at what rate do they enter and at what rate do they exit. So it was very important to do that. And also, in creating a more predictable environment, the president has created the Presidential Tax Reform Committee, which has been tasked to harmonize taxes and some of the overlaps you have between all levels of government, and also make it more efficient by using technology, and also identifying specific tax issues or provisions that are in itself a hindrance to business growth. In the presentation, one of the challenges we saw is anachronistic tax provisions, that maybe with the passage of time are no longer relevant. So the formation of this Presidential Tax Committee is really tasked with creating a more predictable tax environment, so that when investors come in, they know what to expect. Then another aspect is also how responsive you are. And we've seen, even though it has been a criticism to the administration, but we've seen the administration walk back some, policies or regulations that it has put out. But that shows that administration is a regulatory environment that is responsive to feedback from stakeholders. The example would be the expatriate employment tax, for example, and certain provisions of the provision of the Finance Act that was reversed. So our goal is to create an environment that helps us mobilize investments into this space. The government has signed MOUs, that's investment MOUs of up to 4.2 trillion naira. And while these are not commitments, but it reflects a goal to create an environment that allows this to manifest into FDIs and DDIs, foreign direct investment and domestic direct investment. So
thank you.
I can go on and on, but
I can see. But there are a couple of points I want to just pick up on. You sort of gave an overview of what the government is trying to do in terms of ensuring we can mobilize investments into Nigeria, and that's a very important point to pick up on, particularly in view of the AFCFTA.
right.
So for instance, we like to present our economy as the strongest in Africa. So one would presume that we have a lot of comparative and absolute advantages in certain areas. But on the other hand, sort of a juxtaposition is that we see in certain sectors we're very protectionist. So on the one hand, very powerful, strongest economy. Second hand, well, don't open up competition. We need to protect local businesses. So how do we find a happy medium between the two? How do we, on the one hand, encourage policies that protect local businesses, very important, but also, on the other hand, ensure competitiveness and global competitiveness at that?
Yes, and on one part, it's not really up to us in a way, because the AFCFTA protocols mandates that 90% of all trades, tariff lines, will be liberalized. Only then 7% will go through a phased liberalization, and then 3% will not be liberalized. So that means 90% of the trades really will be liberalized. And Nigeria has ratified this, and we're part of it. So for those industries where we believe that we have to maintain a strategic interest in protecting those industries, because maybe out of security or one that requires us to have local capacity, then they will form part of that 700. So 90% would have to be liberalized, and we're party to this. But what are we doing to ensure that, because the question really is, how do we ensure that we benefit from the potential of AFCFTA? And to that, the government, it's one, this is where an effective regulatory environment works. Because if you create an attractive environment, then you're going to attract investments. And when investments come, it's going to help enhance your local capacity, productive capacity, which then means it enhances the export competitiveness of our operators. And then apart from that, there are interventions that are geared towards specifically strengthening the local productive capacity of our operators. Even the work that Smeden is doing from a Growth for Nigeria agenda, where they are providing capacity building to MSMEs, who form the largest part of our business owners, access to finance through the various concessional financing schemes. For example, the 75 billion naira manufacturing facility, which is single digit, the 150 billion naira MSME facility. All of this is geared towards erasing one of the biggest obstacles to building capacity among our businesses, which is access to finance. So.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. Again, a key point I took away from that was the fact that the environment is trying to enable MSMEs, which you've correctly identified as the backbone, really, of the economy in terms of employment, in terms of capital contributions. So I think that's a very good segue to Onesi at Smeden. Now, we saw quite a drastic decline in the number of MSMEs in Nigeria between 2022 and 2024. I think it was about a 45% decline. Now, what would you say are the regulatory hurdles that have been a significant factor in this? What are the regulatory difficulties that have spurred this decline?
Yep. Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. My name is Onesi Lawani, and most times I get mixed up, honesty, but no problem about that. So I work with the Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, and the well-being and wellness of the MSME space is our own mandate. But over the years, we found out that MSMEs face challenging times and over the years. And even though we know that they are responsible for about 85% of total employment and also account for about 48% to GDP, but when you look at their contributions to export, you see that it's very low, it's just 6.2% when you compare it to other emerging economies. And we are worried about that. And we looked at the regulatory system, we looked at the policies, and what we did was to say, okay, what are their challenges? And we found out that they are faced with several challenges. One, most MSMEs, let me maybe be specific now, most nano and micro enterprises don't even know what these policies are all about. It's not in the public domain. they've not been able to get engagement with those people that are supposed to regulate them, and there's that gap. Then aside that, you now see that the cost of being regulated is also a big challenge. And when you have an SME that is just trying to survive, or let me be emphatic now, when you have a nano entrepreneur or a small micro entrepreneur trying to survive, and the regulators are focusing more on the revenue part, it becomes a challenge. The bureaucracy, like Ozofu listed, is also a big challenge. And we are aware that most of all these SMEs, they hold the key to the development of this country, sustainable development of this economy. So in our own effort to see how we can address some of all these challenges, we, in this last National Conference on MSMEs, we deliberately organized a session for small business owners in Abuja. Let us get the feedback from them. And the feedbacks were quite revealing. And it's not too different from some of the issues that Ozofu has highlighted. For instance, some few years back when we did a study on the competitiveness of Nigerian MSMEs, we just felt that, one, the regulators are focusing more on revenue. There is no information shared to MSMEs to use. And the bureaucracy too was also a challenge. What we now did was to see how do we provide a common facility for SMEs to use so that they can contribute more to the GDP. So we established common facility centers across the country, in some states of the country. But while we were just about doing that or taking off, there was a policy change. The fuel subsidy was removed, and our provision or the appropriation that is for diesel for a year was not even able to carry 1 month. Then electricity tariff too was also revised. So it was difficult for us as an agency of government that is even that has the mandate to create enabling environment for SMEs to even create such. So I would want us to sit down and see how we can find a way of engaging with SMEs. Let us get feedback from them. The report will be available. We'll make it public. We'll put it in the public domain for all those. We have, thank God that we have National Assembly members from there. They had a feel of what was the mind, or they had a feel from the minds of the SMEs. We have people from different sectors, the financial sector, the energy providers, so they were all there. So we believe that highlighting all those issues, compliance, in compliance or from regulators, it will be much easier for them now to see how they can address some of all those things through policies, through appropriate policies that can address some of all those challenges.
Thank you very much indeed. And my sincere apologies for mispronouncing your name.
No, you did not.
Oh, I
just
did not.
said that
I
some
see.
other
Okay.
clients you say honesty.
I felt I needed coffee
No,
more
you
than
did very well. Pass mark.
more than I originally imagined. But I like the fact that SMADAN is doing a lot to incorporate SME voices into the conversation. Because in Ozofu's presentation, you would have seen at the adoption stage, she made the point that there needs to be a discussion between the regulator and the regulated. So I think that's a fantastic point, and the more discussions we can have to see how we can incorporate SME voices into the conversation, the better. Maybe could you touch on perhaps a few more things? How do you suggest we can accomplish that?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think the National Assembly needs to have a deliberate engagement with the MSMEs, the operators in Nigeria. And there's also the need to have, for most of those organizations that tend to regulate, to have sessions. It could be at zonal level, engagement with operators of MSME operators, so that they can have a feedback from them and know where their pain points are. Sometimes we just sit down in our offices and think this is what is wrong with the MSMEs. But by the time you sit with them, you have one-on-one engagement with them, you are able to say, yeah, we do a lot of researches, but sometimes those researches don't really portray the challenges that they are facing. So, but times are changing, situations are changing. The research you did some few months back now is not relevant. So, there's this need for regular engagement with MSMEs, and also engaging with organizations that are established to facilitate that sustainable environment for them so that they can have a direct feeling from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a critical conversation that we need to have. But for small business owners, I think we tend to see a gap between policy and implementation. And certainly when I served in government, the mantra was policy is implementation, and implementation is policy. In the sense that your policy, like Ozofu said, is just a piece of paper without implementation. But if you implement the policy incorrectly, it skews it. So you might say, well, we are a business-friendly environment. But if the implementation is showing that actually you need to jump through loop A, B, C, go through the maze to establish and run your business, you are not a business-friendly environment. So that brings me to Princess Adeyinka, because you are a small business owner and you have lived these experiences. We've heard from the special advisors to Mr. President, we've heard from the regulator of small businesses. But what has been your experience in reality? What has been your experience in complying with these regulations, and what have been the main challenges you have faced in applying them to your business?
Thank you. Good morning. I need everyone. Can you hear me? Guys, you might need to put my mic up because everyone has to hear me. When I got the invitation to be here today, I literally felt as though this was my opportunity to lend my voice. It's not just another panel session for me. It's an opportunity to sit here literally feeling the weight of other SMEs in Nigeria. We're over 40 million of us, and I feel as though this is my opportunity to represent them, and I hope I represent them well. I think one of the first issues we need to deal with, and I'm not going to complain about what is the obvious, but the two things that I'm going to sit on today, and I hope that by the time I'm done, the presidency, which I am speaking to today, I made up my mind that whatever I say, I literally feel as though I'm talking to our president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, because my thoughts are not just thoughts. These are the things that I am living through to be as a business owner in Nigeria. First, I think that one of the major problems we're facing is what an SME is to Nigeria. I like to say this, that if you're a business owner or you're an SME, MSME, you are an elite Nigerian. To be living in these times and to be running a business, some of us run it on our blood, we run it on our souls. Every day we wake up, there are young Nigerians that have woken up this morning that are driving this economy. And all we get from the government is an agency. I think that's where the misanomaly is, number one. SMEs deserve an entire state. And I say this very strongly, that until we begin to look at SMEs as the backbone and the engine of this country, how can we relegate SMEs to just having an agency? That's where the first problem is. We're never going to be taken seriously. I always say to my friends and to people who I speak to, as an SME, we deserve the 37th state in Nigeria. Because SMEs cut across every nation, every state, every local government, every city in Nigeria. We deserve an entire state. We deserve a budget. We deserve men and women who are able to run this economy. That's number one. Number two, and I'm speaking again to the president. 10 years ago, I started my business. I was a young Nigerian. I went to school in America. No mommy, no daddy. It took me 12 years to get my first degree. When I graduated, the first thing I did was to get a one-way ticket back to Nigeria. I didn't wait to live the American dream. I could have gotten a green card. I could have lived in America. I would have been great. But I took a one-way ticket. I graduated in June. By August of the same year, I was back to Nigeria. Because I felt as a young Nigerian, I need to put in my quota to building this nation. In 2015, there was a call for African entrepreneurs to come up with an idea that could transform the continent. I applied, and I was among the first 1,000 young Nigerians to be selected for the Tinelumelu Foundation. I got 1 million naira and 3 months training. Today, 10 years later, I have built one of the strongest coffee brands the world has ever seen. And I'm saying this to say this, that young Nigerian entrepreneurs, we're not looking for handouts. Like I said in the beginning, we are young, we're Nigerians, and we're elite. We know what to do. But we need to be rightly positioned to be competitive with other entrepreneurs, not just, a lot of times when people think competition, we're thinking of across Africa. Even amongst ourselves as entrepreneurs, we do not have the resources. And the reason why we do not have the resources is because we are not rightly positioned. That's number one. Number two, I see the role of local investment. A lot of times when we talk about investors, we're thinking of somebody bringing the dollars. I say to people, Dangote did not make money selling cement to Europe. He made his billions selling cement to Africa. That already shows that Africa is self-sustainable, except we put the right things in place. This coffee that you see today is fully Nigerian. 100% Nigerian. But guess what? The coffee you drink is imported into our borders. 22 states in Nigeria grow coffee. How do I know? I'm also the first national president for women in coffee. I've spent 10 years of my life building the frameworks for coffee. But guess what? Nigeria does not have a national policy on coffee. Not one. Not even a law that protects local coffee. So the question is, how can an SME or a business be competitive in our environment that does not have laws that protects her? It doesn't protect importation of coffee. Fast-moving good giants, which I will not mention their names, need to be summoned by the presidency to let us understand how are you able to import coffee to Nigeria while 22 states in this country continue to grow coffee that goes to waste, utter sheer waste. But yet we're spending billions importing what we already have. So my take on it is not just talking. These things are all, I'm not going to talk about tariffs. I'm not going to talk about the increase in petroleum. We're all facing it. But I need to talk about things that face SME. And the first question is, we are not rightly positioned for support. We cannot be under an agency of government. We should be either, like I state, a state or something close to a state. Because look, I have been to the National Assembly. We will not be taken seriously. We were not taken seriously when we took the bill for coffee to the National Assembly. So we need to opt our game. We shouldn't be, regulators shouldn't be calling us at the point where the policy is going to be established. No, we should be at the table before the policies are even brought to life. We are the policy. We're the ones driving the economy. Mr. Tayo just said, SMEs provide 84% of the employment in Nigeria. So we need to have proper discussions with the right people. Thank you.
Well, firstly, thank you for sharing those very genuine experiences. I'm sure Mr. President heard. But more importantly, because yes, it's important to identify the problems, but of more critical importance is identifying the solutions. So given the challenges you have just identified, how do you think we go forward in making these processes more flexible, more inclusive to benefit businesses such as yours?
Thank you. I think the role of finance is always very key in the development of businesses or SMEs. Let me give you one of the anomalies that I witnessed after COVID. We came out of COVID, some of us were barely out of, we barely came out of COVID. And the first thing the federal government did was to give SMEs loans. And I felt that was wrong. How can we be coming out from COVID and then what we get is a loan? Some of us were giving 1 million, some people were giving 1.2 million, something that couldn't even literally bring you back working capital. There is and I would say this, and I've always said that if I ever met the federal, the Professor Adeshino, who also said agri and should be taken seriously. First, there has to be a bank, and I'm not going to mention names. There are organizations in this country that say that they give support to SMEs. I can tell you wholeheartedly, it is not true. The loopholes and the amount of guidelines and the things we need to provide is short of bringing my dead father from his grave. Literally. And we're not able to access it. But sir, some organizations have gotten it right. One, the Tinulimelu Foundation got it. Foundation got it right. SMENG, there are organizations that have gotten it right in how to implement funding for businesses. The government can just sit with them and do what is right. Secondly, we have to look at local investors. Many times young businesses have to go and, when we think of the tech companies, they are raising billions of dollars, fine. But for businesses like mine who are traditional businesses, who depend on raw material from Nigeria, why will I go and collect maybe $1 million from an American investor? Why can't I look for a local investor? I'm more for the Naira. I don't keep dollars. Even when I have excess, I prefer to keep my money in Naira. We need to find a way to create policies that support local investors within the Nigerian value chain to support us, to be able to give us the investment that the banks cannot give, or maybe the government agencies cannot give. There has to be role to protect local investors who have Naira too. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that, yes, I encourage applause for that. I think that ties in very nicely to Smadan's role in including SME voices in the conversation to actually know what is needed for these targeted reforms. So it doesn't feel as if government is speaking at you, but more to you in terms of formulating policies. But I'd like to go to a more global perspective now, and I'd like to bring Bertine into the conversation. Bertine, I know from our conversations you've had experience in India and in Indonesia. And again, from my personal experience when I speak with investors, I know that one of their primary concerns is policy continuity. They're worried that the regulatory environment might be too unpredictable for them to be successful. So based on your experience, particularly from other jurisdictions, how important would you say is policy stability, firstly? And secondly, what should we be prioritizing in terms of helping businesses such as Happy Coffee and other small businesses actually thrive and be competitive?
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I'm sorry about my voice, but I got a bit of a cold. Yes. Good morning, everybody. So let me start with the question around regulatory stability. So I think we have to differentiate from stability and predictability, because obviously stability, if most policies are anti-investment, is not going to help you, right? So that's often the challenge in the countries that I've worked in, including in Nigeria, is that at the one hand, investors want stability, but they want a different set of reforms. So you need to change as much as you need to signal that there's going to be continuity. And I think that's where the word predictability sort of comes in. And I think regulatory predictability comes from the highest levels of government, and it comes from an overall growth vision. What is the vision of government to have a private sector-led growth future? And if that is clear, it will help you do two things. Any regulatory reform that happens is already more predictable simply by aligning with that vision. Secondly, it will help government. And it's a shame Honorable Minister Doris is not here this morning, because she's been asking us the same question. How to make sure as a government you're coherent in the policies that you put out. And that requires a coherent vision of where you want to go to. So that if a Minister of Agriculture wants to protect or limit imports because of protection of domestic farmers, there's an overall story that says, while that might be one policy option, we cannot lash to that policy option because it doesn't fit into the overall story in terms of how we want to have private sector-led growth and how we want to drive our economy. So I think it starts with understanding where you're gearing towards and then measuring the policy proposals against that objective. And this then comes with having a team that can enforce this kind of predictability. And that is not only going to be at the cabinet level. Obviously, in the Federal Executive Council, there needs to be a strong economic team that lets its voice heard. But as was mentioned earlier, the private sector has to be on board from the start. And in the federal system of Nigeria, you have to have the states on board, but because the bulk of policy is implemented, if not regulated, at the state level. So I think those are the third key leg of this predictability is implementation. There's been a lot of great policies out there, but if they don't translate to the same behavior on the ground, when as a producer you're trying to bring your goods to the market and you're stopped in that small trip 40 times, how are you going to be able to still be productive and efficient? That's the kind of unpredictability that will be extremely difficult for any firm to operate. Then if we talk about what kind of policies matter, it really depends on the country context. I don't think we should pull from one country and say, oh, Nigeria should do the same thing. It really depends on what is hurting in Nigeria for the private sector. And this will also be different across different segments of the economy. But I think one thing that most people expect me to say working for the World Bank is that I would emphasize the regulatory process of number of days to set up a business. I think those things need to be worked upon, but very often it's not where the shoe really pinches. There's bigger concerns that most firms have and bigger issues that prevent them from being productive. And those relate to what I would call sort of the backbone sectors to private sector growth. And in the case of Nigeria, this clearly is energy, its ability to move goods within the country and importing to produce, importing to export, and things like access to finance, access to broadband. There's some of the fundamentals that are constrained, and they're not constrained just by physical infrastructure. They're constrained as much by regulatory reforms that need to be taken to allow these sectors to really thrive and become the backbone of a growing private sector. So I think you can look at individual sectors and see where they have the biggest constraint, but it really has to come from that point of view where you're looking together with the private sector. Is like, what are the biggest obstacles for this sector to grow, and how can we work backward to make that happen and make sure you build that coalition between the federal government, the states, and the private sector to actually implement it and then persevere. So I think those are some of the ingredients, and I'm happy to elaborate on any of them.
I think that's a very critical point, and you've been very efficient in that answer, because you've already touched on the second question I was going to ask in terms of what you've seen in other jurisdictions that might work. But what I got from your response was that, well, that might not be the best approach. We have to see what are our pain points. Again, the overarching theme here is there has to be targeted reforms, not just assuming we know what small businesses and big businesses need. There has to be a continuing conversation. And that is what I think we should be encouraging. In particular, I see the leadership of the Shonekan Center here, and I know that they will take that forward. I've been told we're running out of time. I'd love to continue this conversation. Do we have time for audience questions or no? We don't? Oh, one word each. Okay. So if you were to implement a magic pill, one regulatory reform that would solve all our problems, right? Exactly. And I'm going to challenge you in 30 seconds. What would it be?
I think it goes back to what Bertine was saying earlier, in identifying those things that have a huge transformative effect on the economy. So identify a problem that is a common thread across different sectors and different operators. So which to me is actually logistics,
right.
Addressing issues around logistics.
Logistics.
So
got it.
Harmonizing as goods move from one area to the other, making sure it's
so we need to move goods to be competitive and to scale. Right. Brilliant. Yeah. Smedan.
Yes, I think I would suggest that for the compliance or regulatory institutions to change their orientation to be more, or to facilitate more of compliance rather than emphasis on revenue generation. Thank you.
I agree absolutely. Princess Adeyinka.
For me, I think first that SMEs should be a protected class. I don't know how that will work in Nigeria. We need to be looked at. And then I like to say this to SMEs that are also looking at me or watching me today is, you're an elite Nigerian, you deserve all the support you need. We're going to win on this journey like Happy Coffee is winning. And my goal as a young woman, when I built this brand, is to run for the office of the president of this country. And when that time comes, we will win the election. We will create a leadership that puts into consideration the role of women, the role of young people, and how we can develop a country of our dreams for our children and for the generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you for the campaign. And finally, Bertine.
Yes, so I think in line with my earlier comment, I would pick the reforms necessary to ensure that Nigeria has a power sector that provides cost-reflective tariffs and services for all. So I think power is a massive backbone to all firms, very small to large. And right now, power is not delivering for Nigeria, and it's hurting all profit margins and profitability and ability to be productive.
Absolutely. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your time and attention. We wish we had more time to continue this conversation, but I'm sure the discussions will continue. And we look forward to hearing your views in terms of moving us forward in terms of growth and competitiveness. Thank you very much. And a round of applause for the audience. So we'll take a photograph.
Please, I would like Mr. Chairman and our board member to please join the photographs. And our presenter, yes, Chairperson, NBSBL. Okay. Okay, and another board member just joined. Thank you. Okay, so the next one would be the panelist and the chairman, yes. Thank you. The panelist and the chairman, please. Panelist, moderator, and chairman, yes, thank you. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We had such a wonderful session. We are short of time, but we'll just take our closing remarks. I would like to invite Mrs. Wonu Adetoye to please take. Yes, they're bringing it forward. Yes. Thank you very much. Okay, we want to take the closing remarks, please. Could we have... Yes.
Can we please settle down for a few minutes? This is about to close properly. Distinguished panelists and participants, I'm waiting for the hall to be calm. We've had a very beautiful session, so I can understand, but yeah, okay. Just a few minutes, and then we'll have enough time to network, which we ought. Distinguished panelists and participants, as we wind down this very, very interactive session, I don't know about you, but as in, it was just really, really exciting. I'd like to urge each one of us to truly reflect on the profound insights that we've gained and the weight of responsibility that each of us will now carry going forward. Today's session demonstrates the possibility of a shared vision for Nigeria, where regulations fulfill their crucial role as catalysts for economic growth and competitiveness rather than being impediments. The presentation and discussions led by our esteemed presenter and competent panelists have highlighted the challenges within the regulatory landscape and also actionable solutions using a collaborative approach that will benefit all stakeholders. The conversation has reaffirmed that each of us, whether private or public sector, civil society, or academia, each one of us has a critical role to play in this collaborative journey that is just beginning. It is therefore crucial to recognize that the Ernest Shonekan Center for Legislative Reforms and Economic Development exists because we believe in this particular potential. Our mission is not just to drive legislative reforms, but to create regulatory frameworks that will drive growth, instill confidence, nurture innovation, and elevate every facet of our economy. Nigeria's regulatory environment, whilst complex, plays a pivotal role in shaping the nation's economic landscape. It is therefore imperative to remind us to reflect on the purpose of today's conversation, particularly the role of regulations in fostering economic development. The discussions have identified key stakeholders, ranging from government bodies to private sector actors, who must collaborate to create a more transparent and predictable regulatory framework. At the heart of this process, we have the regulators who are responsible for steering the course of our economic growth. The discussions have drawn attention to businesses' deep-rooted regulatory challenges, which have significantly hindered growth, including the over 40 million MSMEs who are playing huge roles in employment creation, which is estimated at 84%. And they hold a key role to the sustainable development of the Nigerian economy. By raising awareness about the roles and responsibilities of regulators, we can, together, address these challenges and create a more conducive environment for business success and economic development. Today's discussions have revealed the importance of mindsets in profiling regulations and also profiled principles of good regulation. The issues of complexity, multiplicities, and bureaucracies have been raised. Issues of policy stability, predictability, and coherence have been brought into fore. Emphasis has also been placed on policy implementation and its crucial role. Furthermore, the discussion identified communication gaps between regulators and businesses, and this must be breached as a matter of necessity in order to align regulatory practices with the rapidly changing economic situations. I believe, therefore, that the recommendations profiled in this session will help in improving communication, collaboration, and integration between regulators and the private sector. Additionally, the session identified priority regulators charged with resolving the most pressing regulatory gaps in order to develop a framework that sufficiently addresses the critical issues faced by business beyond this room. The task before us, therefore, is immense. However, our collective capacity to meet it is equally strong. As we leave this session today, I encourage us to keep the spirit of collaboration alive and urge us to remember that together we can build the regulatory framework that Nigeria deserves by developing frameworks that fuel growth, invite investment, and secure a prosperous future for all. Thank you all very much for your contributions, your commitment, and your support. As we continue this journey with purpose and unwavering resolve, the future is ours to shape for better. God bless you, and God bless our nation, Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, we've brought the session to a close. Unfortunately, we'll need to use this venue shortly, so I would ask that we carry on our networking outside of the venue. I would like to also, thank all the executive members of the ESC, and I can also see here regulators. You're welcome. Thank you so much for coming. All our guests, our panelists, we're grateful. Thank you.
Morning.